I think about what occupational therapy is, there are kind of some words that come to mind for me, like practical, accessible, strategies, changes. So these are all the things that hopefully tonight's talk will discuss, like that. What are practical things? What are strategies we can maybe take with us? What are changes we can make that are going to help towards our mental health? And also this idea of feeling empowered, like that. So very much focusing this evening on our narratives, what's going on in our lives and how we can maybe make that change. What can we look at in the future? How can we help ourselves? And I guess looking at the image that we have up here, I kind of chose this image as this idea of a pathway, that we're all on a pathway of recovery of our physical health, our mental health, our well-being, and it's not like this, it's not always a straightforward path, but this idea that, we can see the sunshine on the horizon here, above the leaves, and we're on a path going forward. So I think that's a nice image kind of to start with this evening. Just to kind of acknowledge with the PowerPoint, we're going to have kind of a mix of some text, some images and a video. Hopefully that will keep it moving along nicely. Not too much text. Hopefully everyone will be able to keep concentrating, and I won't harp on for too long either. Just to mention as well, someone has said it beforehand, that there is a handout on the seat here. I'll discuss that a little bit at the end, but just to mention that the handout's going to correspond to the main points from this evening. And just in terms of questions, as Orla mentioned, we'll have questions at the end. We won't take questions throughout the presentation. So if you have anything burning that you'd really like to ask or mention, maybe just to kind of jot that down. Okay, great. So what is an occupation? So like that, I mentioned I'm an occupational therapist, and the main question people kind of ask me, whether that's someone I'm working with, friends, family, anyone, what is an occupation? What does that mean? So the World Federation of Occupational Therapy defines an occupation as, in occupational therapy, occupations refer to the everyday activities that people do as individuals, in families, and with communities to occupy time and bring meaning and purpose to life. Occupations include things people need to, want to, and are expected to do. So I think that's quite a chunky, hefty definition. So we might just break down, what does that really mean? So first of all, we have this idea that occupations are everyday activities. So as Orla mentioned, they're the simplest things, the smallest part of our day. So they can be the smallest chunks all the way up to maybe more complex things. And we're going to talk about plenty of different examples of those occupations this evening. Next of all, to acknowledge that when we are completing activities or occupations, sometimes we may do so as individuals. They may be things we do ourselves, but a lot of the time they're in the context of being alongside other people. So that might be with families, with friends, in clubs, in work. We're all part of a community, and a lot of the occupations that we do take place within that. Importantly, and I have it highlighted there, this idea of an occupation having meaning or purpose. So this is a really important point and something we're going to talk about a lot this evening. When it comes to our mental health, fueling our mental health, this idea of having meaning and purpose is so important to us. I'm sure if we all think of in our heads now things that are meaningful, purposeful to us, whether they be activities, people, objects, a lot of the time they're the things that kind of give us a lift and help us to keep going. And lastly, we have this idea that occupations can differ. They can be things that we need to do, want to do, or are expected to do. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail, what that means with some examples. So, lifestyle balance, that's kind of the overall premise of this evening's talk. So, lifestyle balance, what are we referring to when we talk about this? So firstly, we just have the image here of the stones kind of being balanced on top of one another. And in our day-to-day lives, that balance is what we're kind of looking to achieve. But much like all of our lives, it's not a simple square or rectangle like you might see in a Tetris game. Each of these stones is different. It has different shapes, different molds on it, and they don't fit perfectly on top of one another. And that's what all of our lives are like, isn't it? It's not a perfect match. We're all working with different things, different strategies, different difficulties in our way, but we're looking for that kind of balance. So, A balanced lifestyle refers to a satisfying pattern of daily activities that is healthful, meaningful, and sustainable to an individual within the context of his or her current life circumstance. So again, just to break that down a little bit, and I promise we won't have loads more definitions, this is kind of the end of it now, but this idea that what activities we do are healthful. So, you know, they're helpful and healthful to our physical health, to our mental health. Again, this idea that they're meaningful, that there's a purpose to them. And when something is meaningful or purposeful to us, it tends to be easier for us to engage in it. And thirdly, that key point there, that it is sustainable. So a lot of the time when we're talking about maybe activities or things that are helpful, how do we do them over a long period of time? How do we build a habit or a routine? So we're looking for things that can be sustainable to us. And again, that acknowledgement that it's all within our current life circumstance or our environment. And just to acknowledge that each environment, each person is an individual. So what your environment looks like, whether that's your physical environment, who you spend time with, is going to look different. It's individual. Lifestyle balance is also a way of living your life which allows you to meet your needs and experience satisfaction with day-to-day living. So with that, I guess the key term to think about there is around your needs, and that all of us have individual needs. And maybe there might be some time this evening to kind of reflect during this around what your needs are, and are they being fulfilled in terms of how you're spending your time and what your routine looks like, or could that change? I guess some examples of needs that we might have might be around the need for social engagement and connectedness, you know, the need for maybe having quiet time for ourselves, the need to be out in nature. So they're just some of the needs, and we'll be talking a little bit about that later on. So there's 3 categories of daily living that I'm going to refer to within the presentation, and that's going to really shape what we're looking at here. So we have a visual. So these are the 3 areas we're going to be looking at: self-care, productivity, and leisure. I hope everyone can see that okay. But as you can see from the visual, it's done in a kind of a Venn diagram, which very much reminds me of maths back in school. So that's what we're looking at here, and we're looking at that overlap. So as I said, we've the 3 concepts: we've self-care, we've leisure, and we've productivity. We're going to talk a little bit this evening about what those concepts means, and in terms of just everyday activities. But I guess one piece to mention here is this piece right here in the middle, where the cursor is there. So in an ideal world, which as we know doesn't exist, when we're feeling well in ourselves and when we're able to engage with activities, be that self-care, leisure, and productivity, when that's all working well for us, this part here is illuminating. We're feeling balanced in ourselves. Now obviously there can be lots of different circumstances where that's not the case. And we're going to talk about some of those examples this evening. But as I said, just in terms of the visual, these are the 3 areas, and this is what we're kind of looking for, that balance in the middle. And again, thinking maybe in your own life of a period where you were feeling kind of balanced and these areas were all kind of working well, all the cogs were turning well. Generally, we tend to feel maybe relaxed, fulfilled, have a sense of accomplishment. They're the kind of things that might come to mind. So we're going to talk a little bit around the first area, which is self-care. So self-care might be an area or a word that we've heard of before. We might have our own understanding of what that kind of means. But just for the purpose of today's lecture, what is self-care? So self-care really are the basic tasks we complete to look after ourselves and how we look after ourselves. So that can really be broken down into kind of 3 different categories when we think about self-care. We have firstly the idea of our physical self-care, so looking after our body. So that can include things like the food we eat, how we fuel and nourish ourselves, exercise, moving our body in whatever way that works for us, having enough sleep, grooming ourselves, brushing our teeth, brushing our hair, washing our face, drinking enough water. They're all the ways that we can look after our physical health. Then we have the second component, which is around our psychological and our emotional self-care. So that's really about how we look after our mind. So that can be the ways that we speak to ourselves. Are we compassionate? Are we supportive of ourselves? And how can we support our own mental health? So for each of us, we may have different strategies that we implement. Sometimes people may, have formal support from counselling, psychology, the different therapists, but also informal support as well, maybe from family members, loved ones, people who we trust that we can get support from. And there are also activities we engage in that can support our emotional well-being. And I'm going to talk about a few of those in the next few minutes. And then just the third area, so we've spoken about the physical self-care, then we have kind of the emotional and the mental self-care. And the third area then is around the spiritual self-care. So that's an area that isn't always applicable to everyone, but if it's something that's important to you and you feel is supportive of your self-care or that ritual is important to you, then that's an area to consider as well. So again, just to recap, we've got with self-care, we've got physical, we've got emotional or mental, and we've got spiritual. So now just to think about some examples of self-care. So the first image here, we've got two people with cups of coffee. So to me, this is maybe an example of just some informal support. Maybe sitting down, having a chat with a friend, with a loved one, and getting that kind of supportive informal talk therapy, if you will. Next, we have here someone drawing a nice looking bath for themselves. So this image really, we could be talking about loads of different elements of self-care. You know, the bath itself is a way of kind of supporting our physical self-care, looking after our body, bathing ourselves, but we've also got this book here. So perhaps this is a way of like relaxation for this person, of minding their mental health. The candle is lit, there's a cup of tea there. To me, this all suggests that this is kind of a relaxation activity for somebody. Next, we have the image of a person doing yoga in what looks like maybe sunrise. You have to get up quite early these days now to be achieving this. But again, with someone doing yoga here, again, this could be a way of looking after your physical self-care, moving your body, exercising, but also for a lot of people that could be, yoga can be a means of looking after your emotional, your mental self-care, and also perhaps spirituality comes into that area. Next, we have the variety of spices of life, so cooking, nourishing ourselves. And for a lot of people, being able to maybe re-engage in cooking or baking can be a really kind of joyful, grounding activity. But nourishing ourselves and cooking is a really important way of looking after our self-care. Then we have the toothbrushes there, so just looking kind of back to basics, this idea of, brushing our teeth, caring for ourselves. And for a lot of us, that might seem like, oh, I brush my teeth twice a day, I don't even think about that. But when we are maybe having difficulties with our mental health, with our motivation, feeling low, doing something like the basics of brushing our teeth can be a really difficult thing, or the idea of getting up in the morning, getting dressed, having a shower, all those things can feel really tricky. So that's an important one. And lastly here, we have the cat asleep. As we know, sleep is really important. And I guess even considering when we're kind of making this change from kind of the summertime into this autumn, winter, earlier nights, maybe we need kind of more sleep these days, and thinking yourself about maybe your sleep pattern, does it work well for you? Are there changes maybe to implement? Do you have kind of a nighttime routine that works for you? All those things can be beneficial in terms of our self-care. So we can sometimes have as well false beliefs around our self-care. So number one, isn't it selfish to put myself first? I think that's a really common one that a lot of us can think at times. And I guess I always think about that image in an airplane of, when the air host or hostess talks about the oxygen mask coming down and how we need to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first before helping those around us. And it's the same with our self-care. If we're not able, or if we don't kind of prioritize looking after ourselves in the first instance, how are we be able to support others around us? So it's so important to look after ourselves first. Next, I don't have time to take care of myself. And I guess, in today's kind of busy world where we're go, 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 and that's what seems to sometimes be rewarded, this constant kind of hamster wheel of just going all the time and not stopping, not taking a break. We have this idea that I don't have time to take care of myself. But then if we think about it, when we don't have time to take care of ourselves, and again, you may think of a period in your life where that happened, what's the outcome? What does tend to happen? We tend to feel stress, we tend to feel tired in ourselves. And another image, I like the use of images. Another image I like to use is, the phone battery on your phone when you're getting near that kind of 10% and maybe the phone gives you a warning, it's gone down to red, battery very low. When we let ourselves kind of get to that really, really low point, that's kind of a critical time for us. So it's so important that we do take the time to take care of ourselves and recharge that battery up. And lastly, this idea, I don't want to spend all this time alone. Maybe the idea that self-care is something that's very kind of solitary for us to do. But again, just to say that it's not, self-care, it's important to get support, whether that be in a formal manner or whether that be in an informal manner. So moving on from self-care, we're going to talk a little bit around leisure now. And this quote, which I know it's a little bit tricky to see, but it says, "There is no wisdom without leisure." And that's a quote from W.B. Yeats. So absolutely, I think with leisure, we can think, what can we take from leisure? When we're all work, work, work and no time for play, that leaves us definitely with an imbalance. Leisure is so important in terms of having a break from the norm, maybe doing something creative, having a bit of a laugh with friends. So just to kind of acknowledge that leisure is a really key part of our lifestyle balance. So there are different types of leisure activities, and sometimes it's good to just kind of categorize these to have an idea of what we're kind of talking about when we think of leisure, because it's such a wide concept. So we have 4 different types of leisure activities. So the first one there we have is active leisure. So that might refer to things that we might do that are active for our body. So they can be different kinds of sports. They could be outings, different exercises, hiking, anything like that where we're kind of moving our body or maybe getting a little bit of a sweat on. Next of all, we have quiet leisure, which I kind of referred to earlier. So quiet leisure are activities we do that mainly we might do kind of for ourselves in a relaxed manner. So they might include things like reading for leisure, maybe writing, listening to music, and completing activities like craft or art. So these are all kind of quiet leisure activities. Next of all, then we have social. So they're things that we do with people we're connected with, whether they're friends, maybe there's people that we meet in clubs, people that we meet in work. These are all kind of social leisure activities. And then lastly, we have educational leisure. And by that, we mean activities that we engage in, maybe in the community where we're learning a skill. So they might be things like maybe night classes or courses, something that we do in a club where we learn a new skill. So maybe like learning the guitar, learning crochet, anything like that. That would be seen as kind of an educational leisure activity. And I guess I'd ask now, just for people, again, kind of internally to consider in these 4 areas, what you enjoy spending time doing. Is there one area that you're saying, maybe you're thinking quiet leisure, that's me. I enjoy kind of having that time for myself to kind of recharge the batteries and do things that I enjoy. But maybe seeing this now laid out, I'm a little bit lacking in social leisure. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit lonely or isolated. Is there a leisure activity I could be completing where I could connect with others around me? So kind of linking in with that, just to consider some of the benefits of leisure. So firstly, relaxation and refreshment. So that's the idea that engaging in relaxing leisure activities can help us to recover from stress and fatigue, from different life stresses that we might have, whatever they are, depending on you as an individual, and help us again to kind of restore that battery. So maybe thinking of kind of a difficult day, there's been a stress going on in the family, in work, or maybe someone has just been kind of rude, you pass by. What do you do to kind of relax and recover from that stress? What works for you? Next of all, we have that idea of the personal development. So engaging activities that help our personal development. So they can be activities such as something maybe in physical fitness, something we do that kind of increases our knowledge in an area, or maybe an activity to do with self-expression or creativity. Social development then, so that would be engaging in leisure activities where we're meeting new people, connecting with new people. Maybe that's in the local community. We might talk of some examples of how we can engage in those later on. Engaging in leisure activities that are to do with our social development is really helpful as well, like that if loneliness or isolation, which if you were here 3 weeks ago was a topic that Amy was speaking a lot about, that idea of loneliness and how connecting with others can help that. And lastly, laughter and humour. Because at the end of the day, if we're engaging in leisure activity, we are looking for something that's going to bring a bit of a laugh, a bit of joy, a bit of spark to ourselves. And for ourselves, that's so important, even down to our physiological makeup, when like that we engage in laughter and humour, that releases kind of the muscle tensions. I'm sure we've all thought of a day where we're just so wound up, the shoulders are up here, the eyebrows are up here, we feel so tight and clenched, and maybe something funny happens, you watch something funny, you have a laugh with someone and you just feel a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more at ease. And again, that's relevant to our mental health as well. Maybe you're having a stressful day. You know, I always think of the example of maybe you're in the car and you're really wound up and you're talking through an argument in your head or something, and maybe a friend calls you and talks about something completely different, tells you a funny story, and you're just taken out of that stressful environment, even if it's just for a short while, and you feel a little bit more at ease. And then again, that idea of the social connectedness and having a laugh with other people and how important that is. So we've now gone through two of the areas. So that's self-care and leisure is what we've looked at. So the third area we're going to look at is productivity. So when we're looking at productive roles or tasks, these are the kind of activities where typically we might have a sense of accomplishment when we complete them, and they might be purposeful for us. Or I always think of productive roles as maybe being the things that might be like on our to-do list that we tick off. So things kind of maybe, whether they're inside the house, outside the house, that you're thinking, oh, that's on the list. I can't wait to just physically get that ticked off now. So, coming back to that initial definition we might remember a while ago from the World Federation of OT, where they talked about different kind of occupations, and that some of them are things that we need to do or are expected to do. So they would be kind of productive roles. They're not always things maybe like leisure that we want to do and we're excited to do. Sometimes they can be things that we need to do or that we're expected to do. So when we think of examples of productive roles, we can kind of categorize them again into three different areas. So I always think about productive roles. There are productive roles inside the home. So they might be things we do to kind of maintain the home. So that could be housework, it could be DIY, gardening, paying the bills, shopping, anything like that. They're productive roles inside the home. Then we have productive roles outside the home. So they can be things like maybe paid employment, volunteering, community work. If you're involved in the local GAA, the residents committee, any of those things are productive roles that are outside the home. And thirdly, then we have kind of caring roles. So again, if it's applicable to you maybe, and you have a responsibility around caring for maybe neighbours, for elderly parents, for children, for pets, that's another productive role. So, and just to kind of say again, with productive roles, we've got inside the home, outside the home, and then the caring roles. And for a lot of us, depending on the different life changes or life circumstances, we might have periods where we're not engaging in productive roles. If we're going through a period where we're really struggling with our mental health or feeling very low in ourselves and not having the energy, sometimes those productive roles are really, really difficult for us to do. Other kind of life circumstances that might change for us could be, moving house, moving job, having a child, retiring. They are all kind of major milestones that can change what our productive roles look like, or maybe stop them. And then after a period, we want to re-engage. So we're going to chat a little bit later on about kind of resources or things in the community that can help us if we want to re-engage with a productive role again. So just to kind of take a bit of a break from all the text and everything, I just want to talk a little bit around this idea of like being productive and how in mainstream media, I know certainly from social media, we see a lot of this idea of being productive, high performance, how can we perform to our very best? We can be kind of inundated from a lot of those kind of images. And I guess to kind of think that there can be two extremes to that. So here we have, first of all, I don't know if anyone recognises the film, but this is from Bruce Almighty, and we have Jim Carrey, and he is typing away. So, we can see from this image, it is high stress, typing away, a bit of a stern look on his face, certainly under a deadline. So that's kind of, we're very much up here, high performance. And then over here, we've got Garfield. And Garfield is chilling out. He's in his hammock with, we won't know what's in the drink, but it looks good anyway. And his relaxed hat on, and he is just sprawled out, enjoying life. So I guess just to show, in a humorous way, we've got these two extremes. We've got this high performance, high energy, and then we've got complete relaxation. And look, there's going to be periods of life where maybe we're in one area or another, but overall, what we're trying to look for is this idea of balance, that neither. No, maybe Garfield, sometimes we need that, especially coming up to Christmas to relax. But that idea that we're looking for that kind of balance in between those and considering kind of both sides. And just to acknowledge that sometimes we have to maybe shut away some of those outside influences that are maybe saying to us we need to do more, work more, perform more. But actually coming back to that idea of that image of the self-care, productivity and leisure, that productivity is just one component of 3, and it's really important to take care of our self-care and our leisure as well. So with productivity, just to chat briefly a little bit around some of the benefits of productivity, because it does get a little bit of a bad rep sometimes. So, sense of accomplishment. So when we engage in a productive role, we can get that real sense of, accomplishment of having followed through with something, or that idea of ticking something off the list that was really important to us. Pride in our work, and that's really important in terms of our self-esteem and our confidence, that when we follow through on something, maybe it's something that we have an end product for. And giving ourselves that time. And, I think sometimes particularly as Irish people, we don't maybe give ourselves that recognition of a job well done. I'm really happy with that. I'm glad that I did that. I did a good job on that. So when we engage in a productive role, whatever that might be, we do get that pride in our work. And thirdly, how that kind of affects our enjoyment in leisure and relaxation things or activities. So that being that maybe when we do a productive task, or we've had a productive day, when we sit down and do something we enjoy, whether that's watching a movie, having a chat with someone, going for a coffee, we tend to enjoy that all the more, because we've done maybe that hard work during the day, and then that sense of kind of relaxation or leisure is kind of extra fulfilling for us. On the other hand then, just some considerations when we're thinking about productivity in our lives. So if like that we're Jim Carrey in Bruce Almighty, and we have kind of too much productivity going on, too much stress, like that we can become overwhelmed by work. And again, when I say the word work, I'm not talking about paid employment, I'm talking about any of those roles we do inside the home, outside the home, caring, all of that is that kind of productive or work role. So like that, when we become overwhelmed, we can be stressed, our sleep can be affected negatively, and maybe we're not able to focus on other important things in our lives. We can have not enough time to enjoy leisure and self-care occupations. So again, coming back to that visual of the 3 circles, when productivity kind of overtakes, it's going down, it's feeding or eating those 2 other areas of self-care and leisure, and we don't have time for that anymore. And when we don't have time for kind of self-care or leisure, we're missing out on enjoyment, relaxation, and recharging that battery. And again, a key word that we may have all heard, that idea of burnout, that can occur sometimes when maybe we've too much stress going on. So burnout, is physical or emotional exhaustion. And I guess what makes that different from maybe being overwhelmed is that it tends to be a longer term stress for us. So it's been going on for a longer period of time. People can experience symptoms like lack of energy, poor sleep, aches and pains, guilt, exhaustion. But what can we do to help with that? Again, we're coming back to this idea of how we can rebalance. How can we rebalance that stress? And sometimes we might need support from others to understand, how am I going to rebalance that? Maybe I have to consider what my priorities are. Maybe I need to implement boundaries. Maybe I need support from work or other people to get back to that. And also that idea of not just thinking about activities that sometimes deplete our energy, but what nourishes us. And I really like that word, nourishes. It's kind of like that idea of maybe a plant. I know there's one on my office that is dead from the heat, not looking very good at all. But when that's nourished, given water, given feed, what is that going to look like then? It's going to grow, it's going to start blossom, leaves coming out, the flowers pointing towards the sky. So what works for you? What's your water? What is your feed that's going to nourish you when you're feeling like you're having a difficult time? So just to chat a little bit around imbalance in our lives, again, in a realistic way, there's always going to be periods in our lives where we might feel balanced and other times that we feel quite imbalanced. And that can happen when we maybe are not engaging in activities of importance to us, or if we're engaging in too much in one area. So just to give 2 brief examples. So work-life imbalance. So this can happen maybe if we have too much work going on and not enough leisure. We can, like the previous slide, feel overwhelmed and burnt out. But on the other side, when we have too much leisure and not enough work, we can feel quite understimulated and bored. So we're again trying to get that kind of balance. Rest activation imbalance, similarly, when we have too much of any activity or lots of activities and not enough time for relaxation, we can feel exhausted, we can feel anxious, we can feel overwhelmed. But on the other hand, when we don't have enough activities and we've kind of a lack of any structure, we can feel kind of lethargic and apathetic. So they're just to kind of give you examples that sometimes there can be an imbalance. We can kind of see that from the image above, if that top stone was taken away, things would imbalance. But when we can maybe think of how we can rebalance and place that back on, we can get ourselves back to the norm. And also just to mention, it's not written up there, but another kind of balance to consider is time spent with others and time spent with ourselves. I mentioned earlier how important it is to get support from others, but it's also really important, to have that kind of me time for ourselves. And for each individual, that's going to look different. Some of us really require or enjoy a lot of time spent alone and maybe engaging in quiet leisure. And for others, that's not so much the case. So we have a quote here, just when we're kind of finished this section, to break it up a little bit. The secret of getting ahead is getting started. So that's a quote by Mark Twain. So up until now, we've talked a little bit around lifestyle balance. We've looked at the 3 different areas: the self-care, the leisure, and the productivity. And that's great. That's great to have ideas. But I guess as an OT, we are talking about that change. So how can we make these changes? So the first idea is to really think about what changes we might like to make. So you might even be thinking in your own head now in terms of self-care, productivity, and leisure. Maybe there's an area that you're thinking, I'd like to make a change in, or something you'd like to do differently. So now it's about kind of getting started and making that change. So we're going to talk a little bit around the idea of motivation and what that means. So motivation might be a word that we've heard frequently. And I know for myself, and probably for a lot of us, sometimes motivation is something we're thinking, oh God, I just don't feel motivated to do that. That feels really hard. Or we might compare ourselves to others and say, that person always seems really motivated. I'm seeing on their social media, they're out running the hills or getting up at 5 a.m. How can they be so motivated and I don't feel motivated to do those kind of things? So we're going to talk a little bit around this idea of motivation, but also the idea of momentum. So hopefully that's not too small for you to read, but I'll read it out loud. So motivation is the positive feeling that takes you out of the comfort of inaction and drives you into the unknown of making a change. So I said this is the kind of the feeling and the thinking part. Next, momentum is the force that keeps you going. So this is the doing. While motivation is the feeling, momentum is the action part of the equation. So again, what do we kind of mean by this? This concept or idea acknowledges that, yes, of course, sometimes we are going to feel motivated, and a lot of the time we feel motivated to do things that we maybe enjoy or maybe things that we're kind of good at and we're used to, but we're not going to always feel that. If something's difficult or something's unknown to us, we might feel scared or stressed about the idea of doing something rather than motivated. But if we can take that action or build that momentum, that doing part, that's going to help us. So just to give a little bit of an example, okay, so we'll say if we have someone who wants to join a local swim class. They've looked up the swim class, everything's open post-COVID, this is the swim class they want to join, and they're feeling nervous about joining it. They don't know anybody, they don't know what the class is going to look like, are they going to be able to take part? They're not feeling motivated at all. But if that person can take that leap to make that action and to go, maybe they help themselves, they prepare the bag the night before, they're out the door on time, they take that action. When they go to that swimming class, that's when you get that kind of positive feedback. We think, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Okay, nobody was looking at me, everybody was concentrating on their own swimming, getting on with their own thing, and maybe it wasn't the easiest thing in the world, but I'm glad I did it. I said I was going to do something, I followed through and I stuck with it. So when you get that kind of positive feedback for yourself, that's what makes it easier the next time to engage. So we'll say if the swimming class is on a Wednesday evening, the following Wednesday you'll be thinking, okay, still not like absolutely dying to go to the swimming class, but I went last week and when I finished it, I was glad I did it. That's the big thing. When we engage in something, how do we feel afterwards? Are we happy? Are we satisfied that we did it? That's going to help us to keep going again and again. And like that, over time then, when we keep kind of building this habit, we keep going to this swimming class once a week, over time that fuels that motivation, and what we're doing feels easier, the benefits start to outweigh the negatives, and all of a sudden a few months later we're saying, swimming, I enjoy going to that. Maybe there's even been better benefits. You might have connected with someone, made a friend in the class that you go for a coffee with. Maybe you're taking up another swimming class. But it's just to acknowledge this idea that motivation and momentum are two different things, and remember, action precedes motivation. I think that's really important because we're all humans. We don't all feel motivated all the time. We all have things going on that are stressful for us, and just to acknowledge that that's okay. We're not going to feel motivated all the time. But if we can sometimes take an action for ourselves, put that action in place, the motivation will follow then. So just to talk a little bit around the idea of routine now and how we can kind of implement a routine for ourselves to support our mental health. A routine is a sequence of actions that's regularly followed. So key idea there being that it's something that we regularly do. We're doing it on a regular basis. So how can we make changes to our routine? So the kind of first step that I talked about a few minutes ago, if we want to make a change to our routine, what is that change? What is it that we want to make a change in? Maybe you're going back to those concepts, self-care, leisure, productivity. What would I like to maybe make a change in? I always think of the idea of like every New Year, setting the New Year's resolution, and you might have a great idea, but the follow through. I know for myself, the follow through normally doesn't occur. So with that in mind, what's the first step? If we're trying to make a change in our routine, what is the first step? And the first step really is around setting a goal for ourselves. So a pattern to follow and an idea, or like that initial image we had, a pathway. So what is the path that we can follow, maybe to make a change for ourselves? So I'm going to talk a little bit around goals now and the idea of setting a goal. And the acronym I'm going to use is SMART goals. So this is the kind of concept that we use in occupational therapy as a way of, I guess, supporting ourselves when we set a goal that we can actually follow through on it, and feel that we went from point A to point B. So firstly, why do we set goals? So we set goals to give ourselves a sense of meaning and motivation, to increase our confidence, helps with our time management. And it's really important when you're setting a goal for yourself, whatever goal that might be, to not just focus on the here and now of where we are, but to maybe consider the past as well. So what are things that you used to do in the past maybe that you enjoyed, that gave you a lift? And are they things that you can re-engage in? I know from my own work, a lot of the time when I chat with people and there was maybe something they used to enjoy doing, maybe that stopped because of COVID. That was a big halt to things. But is that happening now again in the community? Is that something I could re-engage in? So when we set goals, as I said, we're talking about this idea of SMART goals. So what does that mean? So S, specific. So setting a specific goal for ourselves, something that's not kind of vague. And again, I always think about the New Year's resolution, I'm going to get fit, I'm going to eat healthy. Great ideas, but they're all very kind of vague concepts. So can we make it a little bit more specific for ourselves? Is it measurable? Is there a way of kind of measuring this goal and whether I'm able to kind of achieve it or not? Is it achievable for me? So I always think about, we're not going from, we'll say, the foot of a mountain and looking for the summit. We're looking at kind of one step at a time. So what's achievable for me at this moment in time? And what kind of links to that is that idea of what's realistic as well. If we can kind of think about maybe what's realistic or what are kind of barriers, then we can work around that. So what's realistic for me? And lastly, the idea of a goal being timely. So can we set some sort of a time frame for it? And if we can set a time frame and even write down that for ourselves, that will help us. So even small things I do, like maybe if I have a goal set, like I put that in the calendar on the phone, so I can see in a month's time, did I follow through, or even on a few days' time. So I know that's kind of maybe a tricky concept when we're not applying it to anything. So I'm going to just talk through this idea of setting a SMART goal with a case study. So we'll call our person we're talking about this evening Joe. So Joe was an individual that I was working with who was looking to kind of set a goal for himself. So his initial idea, when we met and discussed it, was about doing something creative. He was a creative person. He wanted to do something creative in the community that had kind of a social factor to it, that it was something to do in a group. He himself felt kind of isolated where he was living and the work he was doing. So he wanted something that would be social and creative. So we tried to kind of narrow that down into something a little bit more specific. So Joe was finding it hard to maybe think of activities in the here and now, something new he could do that was creative. But when we drew back and maybe thought about what had happened in the past or things he enjoyed, we came up with the idea of photography. So that was something that Joe had done in school, he'd enjoyed, he'd had an interest in it, and just the way life had gone, that's something that hadn't occurred for him again, but it was something he was open to engaging in again. So when we did a little bit of research, we found that there was a local photography club in the local area that he would be able to join. And we did a little bit of research around where this was on, when it was on. So this was something he was going to engage in. And the other piece with Joe that we kind of talked about was there going to be like an end product to this? Was there going to be something that at the end of this goal, he might have to kind of show for this or have that kind of pride or accomplishment? So for him, he was saying he enjoyed doing kind of outside nature and landscape photo, and that he'd like to take a photo that he'd be happy with to frame and have at the end. So this was the specific goal we were looking at. The next piece was around how could we kind of measure whether he was going to be able to achieve that goal or not. So this local photography club was meeting 2 evenings a week, a Tuesday and a Thursday evening. So for Joe and the role he was working in, this was something that was manageable for him. Had it been 4 evenings a week, he would have said, no, I can't do that. But 2 evenings a week was a measurable amount for him. So now we could say with the goal, okay, Joe, the goal is to go to this photography club and attend 2 evenings a week for a period of time. Next of all, was this goal achievable for Joe? Was it a good fit, or was it a jump too much or a jump too little? So Joe acknowledged that he had some skill level from engaging in photography before in the past when he was in school. The group itself was an amateur photography group, so he didn't feel like he was going to be amongst professionals and he wasn't sure how he'd be. This was going to be kind of a nice relaxed community group. So on that level, he felt like it was achievable. From the social point of view as well in the group, when speaking with the facilitator, it was a small group of about 6 individuals. So in terms of kind of his social connectiveness and not feeling too stressed, he felt like that number was achievable kind of for him to be in. It wasn't going to be too overwhelming. Next of all, when we look at what was realistic, you're thinking about maybe what are some of the potential difficulties with engaging with these activities. So the big thing for Joe and a big positive was that it was in the local area. So it was only down the road from him. So he was going to be able, from a time management point of view, to actually engage with this activity. And also in terms of getting there, he was aware of the local bus route. He didn't drive. He knew the bus route that he could get there. And from his bus from work, he could actually stay on and take the bus. And the other thing to consider was around the use of a camera. As we know, cameras are very expensive. He didn't have an expensive camera. And like that, he was only joining a group that he wasn't sure whether he was going to enjoy or not. So it would be a huge investment to buy a camera. So thankfully, the group offered the idea of renting a camera for a term. And financially, that was okay for Joe. So he was able to kind of beat that factor. And lastly was this timely factor. So how were we going to see whether this goal had been achieved or not? So we put a loose time frame on it, that it was actually October time, similar to now, that Joe engaged in the group to give himself from kind of October to Christmas, the 2 months, the goal of engaging for 2 months, approximately twice a week, and to see how he got on with that. And again, for him, that seemed like something would be achievable. We acknowledged that wasn't going to always be the case. Everybody has things that happen that are outside of our control, circumstances. Maybe 1 week he wouldn't be able to make it, but that he would go back to this overall idea of attending for 2 months. So we've kind of talked through that SMART goal format, and just to mention, that's one of the ones that's on the handout, so you'll kind of see it laid out again. But just to consider, what are like some of those factors when you're setting a goal? So if anyone this evening is going away thinking that they'd like to maybe set a new goal for themselves, what are some of the things to talk about or consider? So planning and research. So we'll say, going back to that goal with Joe and myself, there was planning and research involved in that. When we said photography club, it was around searching online, seeing what local photography club was out there. Was it up and running post-COVID? What were the dates and times and locations? And also doing maybe a little bit extra to help with maybe any stress or anxiety. So we actually phoned the photography club, spoke to the facilitator. In doing that, that kind of helped to alleviate kind of stress, having a friendly voice on the phone. And actually this facilitator offered for Joe to pop down to the club in the community centre at another time when the group wasn't on, just to have a bit of a chat. And that idea of having met someone face to face in a more relaxed manner helped to put him at ease. Then we have the environment, which I spoke about earlier. So we have the physical environment and the social environment. So for this goal, the physical environment was this community centre. And, Joe was fortunate that he could go down and kind of have a look at the community centre. So when he was down there, he could see that it was a warm, bright, kind of friendly community centre. It was easy to get to. It was somewhere he felt comfortable. It also was on in the evening time, so it wasn't kind of too overwhelming with maybe kids groups or a lot going on. The second part of the environment then is the social environment. So like that, I'd mentioned this was just going to be a small group of about 6 individuals. It wasn't going to be very loud. It happened to be people that were in and around his kind of age, so he felt comfortable with the social environment. Potential barriers then that I mentioned earlier, the main one being the cost of maybe having to buy a camera and maybe not feeling that committed. You didn't know whether he was going to enjoy the group or not. So like that being, having the option of renting a camera alleviated that. And also the cost in general, there was a small cost in attending the group weekly, but that was okay for Joe. And lastly, that idea of supports. And that's the key thing, when we're setting a goal, who are our supports? So for Joe, he had that formal support of myself as the OT. We were meeting every kind of 2 weeks as a check-in. How are you getting on? Can we problem solve around any issues? Is there anything that's not going right for you? But also he had the supports informally of a sister who was very encouraging and of the facilitator in the club. So just going to take a little break for a second now. We're nearly finished. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm just going to play a little short video just for us to have a look at. I know I've talked a lot about the changes we can make, but it's nice to hear from some other people as well around maybe little things or little changes they feel that they can make to their everyday life.
I want to talk to you about anxiety, depression, feeling crap, feeling down, demotivated, because it's a place that all of us have been naturally.
Hello, I wanted to jump on here today really quickly and have a little chat about
the little things you can do within your day to help make it that little bit more positive.
Mental health is all about the little things, but for me the most important thing is exercise, being active and staying active.
It's so key to have a good sleeping pattern if you want to maintain good mental health.
Meet friends, talk to them about your issues, hear about their issues, realise you're just the same.
One of the biggest things I've learned is that sharing is so important. So whenever I feel like I'm losing a little bit of control of how I'm feeling within a day, I throw it into a WhatsApp group with my mum, my sister and my dad, and they're always there to help calm me down and tell me that my problem is not as big as I think it is.
I try and train every single morning before work, just to kind of, while I'm feeling my freshest, to have my pre-workout next to the bed, and I'll just kind of neck that the second I wake up, I'll be out the door, I'll train, and I'll be ready to attack the day.
I have learned that, I can't control how I feed myself and how I feed my kids. And I've also learned that if we're eating well and we're eating healthily, well, everybody's in a much better place mentally.
Personally, what I do and what I find works best is exercise, and I'm sure anybody dealing with any form of mental illness, any shade of depression, anxiety, or even more serious mental illnesses, are probably sick of hearing that exercise is the one fix for it all. But for me, it really does give me a natural tiredness towards the end of the day, and I really find myself craving my bed.
I don't think I've ever recalled going into a training session and coming out feeling worse than what I did going in, and I could definitely say that it's brought me to the place where I am today, which is a much happier place.
It's just a reminder to take care of the shell that you're living in, because it's the greatest thing that you'll ever own.
So, yeah, that was just a little short video from the HSE there, where you can see different people, lots of different people of different ages and different ways of life, looking at the kind of the little things that help them. And the thing I always think about is maybe that idea of a tool belt. If you're a builder with the tool belt and all the different tools, what are the tools that work for you? What is helpful? If you're having a stressful day, what are one of the tools that you can reach for that's going to be a support for you? So just the last few slides now, just to finish off today's lecture, just on the premise of like that, thinking about what other people find, just have some individual reflections. So as Orla mentioned, there's a group I run here in the hospital around kind of lifestyle balance and lifestyle redesign. So I asked some people what their thoughts were on routine, making changes, and these are just a few quotes of what people had to say. Routine. I find it helpful to document my routine. Example, mark walls on calendars, can see the progress at the end of the month. So for this person, they're kind of showing us how maybe having a visual helps them in terms of setting a goal or having a routine. For another person, stress to achieve self-imposed routine goals. So for this person, they were finding maybe they were being too stringent, too hard on themselves, having this really kind of focused routine that they had to follow, and maybe it was around kind of pulling back or engaging in more kind of leisure activities. Taking up a night course, this was an example of someone, they felt this was the next step for them. Cycling and feeling mellow, that was a leisure activity, kind of an exercise one that someone said really was beneficial for them. And intend, plan, turning up, taking part, feel good, repeat. I feel like that's so apt. You would think that it came from a book, but no, this is just what someone came up with themselves. And that really is the step, you know, an intention to do something, putting a plan in place. I love that phrase, turning up, taking that action, turning up for ourselves, taking part in it, feeling good. And the key one is repeat. So just for the last few minutes today, just to think of that idea of some resources. So we've looked at the kind of concepts of self-care, productivity and leisure. We've looked at motivation and how we can set a goal. So what are some resources, some practical things that you can take away this evening that might be helpful for you going forward? So firstly, this idea of support. So having support from others around us, again, whether that's formal, informal support. Who are our supporters? Thinking in our head now, who are our supporters and who can help us or encourage us when we set a goal? Sometimes it can be helpful to say to someone, look, I'm really going to try and kind of do this goal, take part in this class. You know, maybe would you come with me? Or if you can't come with me, will you ask me about it and kind of encourage me to take part? Next, we have this idea of the calendar, like that individual had in the previous slide, putting things down in the calendar for ourselves. You know, having that kind of external motivator there, that ping coming up on the phone saying class today at such and such a time. Then we have the alarm clock. So maybe if it helps us to set an alarm for ourselves, whether that's the alarm of going off in the morning, getting up a few minutes early, if it helps us to maybe have a few more minutes to come to or to read our book or to give our face a wash in a more relaxed manner. Alarms are, you know, important. Not all the time, it's important to have a break, but sometimes alarms can be helpful to help us kind of stick to our routine. And then this idea of like a diary or a notebook. So something that we can write appointments down in, we can write goals for ourselves, we can reflect on how things are going, like that, you know, that it's gone well or maybe that it didn't go well for ourselves, having that, you know, and sometimes I think it's very powerful to write something in your own handwriting as well. It can be more meaningful than just thinking it in our heads. So these are resources of things that we can do ourselves, and then we'll just finish on some of the resources in the community. So just to mention, these resources that I'm going to talk about, all this information is available on Google as well. So just some different resources in the community. As Orla mentioned, before I worked in John and God's, I worked in the community mental health team where I would have been linking in a lot with different agencies that are in the community. And I think now that COVID is over and that we can mainly go back and engage with the community, it's really important to know what's out there, you know, and there can be a lot going on. So the first agency to mention is called Ability Plus, and this is an organisation that supports young people with mental health difficulties or disabilities to progress along a career path or training. So again, this is a free organisation. It's for individuals 18 to 25 who maybe meet any of that criteria. And this is done through kind of a community partnership scheme. But again, if you put in Ability Plus into Google, you'll find the information there. Next of all, we have Volunteer Ireland. So Volunteer Ireland are the national volunteer development organisation and support body for local volunteer centres. So again, if you go onto the Volunteer Ireland website, you can register as a person who's interested, and they have a really kind of simple drop-down menu. You can put in, you know, where you're living, and you know, whether you're interested in engaging something once a week, a few times a week. What are your interests? Are you interested in volunteering in a charity shop, with animals, for an event? And someone even said to me the other day they'd engage in something just on a once-off basis, just an event that was on one time they wanted to volunteer with to kind of dip their toe. Next, we have social prescribing. And for anyone who's here a few weeks ago, this is one of the agencies that Amy referred to in her presentation. So for anyone who wasn't there, social prescribing is an intervention which refers people to a range of non-clinical community support which may help their health and well-being. So with the social prescribing, that's a really good intervention to maybe find out what's going on in your local community. Because a lot of the time we may not know, you know, what groups, what clubs are going on. And with social prescribing, you can be referred by your GP or an allied health professional, but you can also refer yourself. Libraries, just to acknowledge that there can be lots going on in our libraries, different groups that are going on. You know, some libraries have yoga, mindfulness, healthy cooking. Just have a look in there and see what's going on in our libraries and on the notice boards. And again, similar community centres. What's going on in our local community centre? Are there any groups? Are there any supports that are going on in our local community centre? Here I just have the Education Training Board, which is the hub really for anyone who might be looking to do like a part-time course or get into maybe some further training. Again, if you look up ETB, you can find what your local one is. The one I have there, just for the reference of the logo, is the Dún Laoghaire Rathdown, which would be maybe the closest one. But if you put into Google the ETB, you can find what's your local education training board and what courses might be available. Nikecourses.com. Nearly finished now, I know this is a lot of information. Nikecourses.com, they are the biggest course finder in Ireland. So again, they can be a way of maybe finding what courses are going on in your local area that you might be interested in engaging with. And last of all, we have Uber, which is the local employment service. So they assist anyone who's maybe seeking employment, and they offer a range of different supports for people who are seeking employment, whether that be help with like developing your CV, with interview prep, searching for jobs. And again, they can be found, the local employment service, they're run through the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection. But for everything I've mentioned there, and I've checked, you can find all of that kind of on Google or someone who might be able to help you. So just in conclusion for this evening, engaging in activities of interest and meaning to us can support our mental health. A balanced lifestyle includes self-care, leisure and productive roles. Motivation is a positive feeling, whilst momentum is the action part of making a change. And we can set goals to help make positive changes to our routine using the SMART goal format. So all that information is in the handout that I gave out there. They're the kind of 5 key points from today. So just leave you with one more quote. One day or day one, you decide. So just to acknowledge that, you know, we can talk the talk and maybe say we'll do that in the distant future, or you might take something from today, whether it's signing up to something, responding to a text, being open to an invitation to somewhere, seeking that support from someone. You know, this can be day one of maybe making a change to support our mental health. So thanks so much for listening. I know this was lengthy and I appreciate everyone taking the time to be here. So thank you very much.